Hey folks, this video, just like all my other videos, is really going to be oriented towards doing animal agriculture of any kind, whether it's meat, milk, or fiber, for profit. To be clear, this is not a full-blown like ranching for profit class or anything like that, but every time I go to a seminar, organization, clinic that is really geared towards for-profit activities with animal agriculture, I see this chart. And this chart is the reason. This chart's a really good chart. It's a really good data visualization. If you've never seen this chart before, or maybe you've seen it, but you don't understand it, this video is for you. And if there's nothing else, like if you don't learn anything else before trying to get into animal agriculture for profit, learn this chart. Learn and understand this chart. Now, this chart is just an abstraction. You'll notice there's no labels on the X or Y axis. You can make a very specific chart that goes with that's very specific to your operation. This is just the abstract one. So the y-axis, y is up and down, right? X, y, yeah. The y-axis is dollars, and it's both costs and income, gross income. And down here is kind of the size of your operation. I put number of animals. That can be kind of misleading, but for purposes of what we're talking about today, it's accurate enough to say number of animals. And you have, so we'll start with overhead costs. That's that red line right there. Those are costs that, generally speaking, do not scale with the number of animals. Ish. Almost all overhead costs do kind of scale sometimes. An example, livestock guardian dog is a cost. It costs feed, it costs tick medication to keep that dog healthy, and other costs on top of that. A livestock guardian dog is a cost. That being said, if I had 10 head or if I had 100 head, I would probably still just have one livestock guardian dog. If I had 300 head, I'd probably have more than one, probably two. I don't know exactly where that line is, but that would kind of represent a more direct tick up, because it's not like I'm going to have 1.5 dogs. So it does more go into those overhead costs. This next orange line, you probably already guessed, is your direct costs. Is your direct costs on a per head basis. Vaccinations, winter feed, summer feed if you're not grazing, pasture lease to a certain extent. If you're going to have more head, you have to lease more pasture, although we'll talk a little bit about manipulating these lines and ways to manipulate these lines. Any number, some of your labor costs, if you have sheep and you have to pay someone to come shear them, that's a per head cost. That's a direct cost. And you'll notice overhead plus direct costs, number of animals. And then the green line is your gross product. It is how many dollars or pounds of animal, or however you want to measure that, how many dollars of animal you're producing. And you'll notice there's just this one little triangle that represents profit. The whole rest of this, you're operating at a loss. If you're in that space, you're at a loss. Now, hopefully, I did a decent job of explaining that. So let's talk about how to actually use this chart. The idea of this chart is not, oh, it's hopeless, you have to be huge. I don't think. Is that, oh, it's hopeless, you have to be huge in order to make money. No, not at all, in my opinion. Although, yes, this is your biggest lever to pull. Right here is your scale, generally speaking. But there are levers to pull up here. For direct costs, for example, I keep goats on corn stalks through most of the winter. That significantly cuts down on my direct costs, on my feed costs through the winter. There's a lot of other things that you can do to direct costs. We mentioned like pasture leasing. If you're leasing pasture, if you manage your pasture better, you'll get more out of it. And if you get more out of it, then your direct costs, again, feed costs is all it really is, your feed costs go down. And then we can talk a little bit about overhead and how to manipulate that. One thing on both of these is to not take on costs that you don't need or that aren't net profitably. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But for example, I have a skid steer. That skid steer, in order to offset the depreciation and maintenance costs for that skid steer, I actually loan it out to family members. One family member. And that family member covers the maintenance costs of that skid steer as payment for that. And those hours, he only puts a few hours on it a year, and I'm only without it for a few hours a year. But that's a great deal for me. It's a great deal for him too, because it would cost him way more than that to rent a skid steer. So that works out as a pretty good deal for me, a way to offset my overhead costs. Other things that I do, I don't have, a double-decker livestock trailer. I don't need one. That would be a silly overhead cost to put on there. So there are ways to move these lines around. Now let's talk about moving this green line. And I'm going to kind of deliberately lead you into a losing scenario here. Let's say we put out a creep feeder and we do manage to wean a little bit heavier kids. And we make this gross product line, we make it go up like that. Ooh, boy, that looks good, don't it? Don't it? Except what we also did was increase our overhead costs. Or excuse me, our direct costs. And now maybe our direct costs look more like this. And let's say, we're at this point. Well, that's a smaller gap than that one. So yeah, we produced more kids, we produced more pounds of kids, but we're making less money because we increased our direct costs. And this is the real trick when we talk about like low input agriculture. You need to make sure the inputs you do engage with are net profitable and sustainable for you. And maybe for you putting out a creep feeder would be a net gain. Maybe. I'm not saying that it isn't. For me, pretty darn confident that it's not. And this is more like what would happen. And that's even negating things like labor costs and stuff like that. So hopefully we kind of touch base on this on this chart enough that you're familiar enough with it now. There's a lot more written about this. If you really want to get into this, go to a Ranching for Profit school. This is kind of like there's a lot more to it. You'll get a lot more out of it than this, but this is kind of one of the big things that they'll really drive home on you is this chart. But like I said, if you're in animal ag and you don't know this chart, you should. If you're thinking about getting into animal ag and you don't know this chart, you should. And you should really start thinking about how can I manipulate things on this chart to help me make more money. And maybe, again, one of your biggest levers to pull is just the scale of your operation.